Hello, this is Ben119 and welcome back to another video. So today I'm going to be doing another podcast, and on this one I'm going to be talking about what makes speedrunning fun. So yeah, this should be an interesting topic, so let's just get on with it. So I think the first thing that makes speedrunning fun is the amount of different games there are to choose from to speedrun, and the amount of things you can do within those games. Like, no two games are the same, and even games that are in the same series do play differently. For example, a speedrun of Super Mario Odyssey is very different to a speedrun of Super Mario 64, and it requires different skill sets, and it might target different people entirely when it comes down to grinding for world records, or even just getting into it casually. I think the fact that there's so many different games you can run and so many different types of gameplay within those games makes it really accessible and makes it really open to so many different types of people. And you can pick loads of different games, that you don't just have to stick to one game. Obviously, it's just like a fun thing you can do. So for example, a speedrun of a Zelda game is very different to a speedrun of a Mario game within its pacing, like the amount of gameplay to cutscenes. The gameplay is obviously very different, like platforming's more fast paced, whereas a Zelda game might have more precise tricks where you have to like clip out of bounds. But a platform game, a lot of games that are popular to speedrun are usually platform games or racing games, because the games are usually designed in a way that they're fun to speedrun or they're fun to play fast. Like games like Mario 64, the reason why they're so fun to speedrun is because they have a really good balance of accessibility and mastery. I guess you can call it mastery, or when you really commit to learning something and you want to learn everything. Yeah, that's the word, mastery. Because it's so easy to get into. Anyone can literally just pick up Mario 64 and do a speedrun of the game, even if they only played it casually. But at the same time, there's so many things you can learn, there's so many things you can like practice to get much faster. And you can be a good player. You can have like a 150 in 120 star and you can be a really good player. However, you can still improve by like 10 minutes, which is insane to me. Like, you look at old world records and the gameplay looks really good still. Like, you don't look at old world records and you think, oh, that's rubbish, I understand why it's been beaten. You look at old world records and you think, how has they actually improved it this much since? And that's just what's insane to me about speedrunning, is how much you can improve at a game or a run, especially when the community really push for certain times. That can always be fun. But back on my topic on games, I think when a game is easy to get into, more people then get into it. It's easier to get into. For example, a game like Ocarina of Time 100%, the 100% category is a very difficult category, and not as many people are going to pick it up because it's extremely long, it's full of difficult tricks, and you do have to be very dedicated to do that category. You have to really care about the game, and you have to be really passionate about that one category. But with a game like Mario 64, any speedrunner of any other game could easily just pick up Mario 64. Any just casual player who has played the game before, or even someone who hasn't played the game, could just pick it up. And it's easy to understand. The game is very easy to understand, which I think makes it accessible. That there's not complicated missions or complicated story objectives and cutscenes or things you have to remember. It's literally just collecting stars. You just have to remember where the stars are, and then you just have to remember how to get to each star. And I think the fact that it's such a simple concept as well makes it easier to watch, because the audience can clearly see what's going on. They can clearly see if someone's playing well or if someone's not playing well. They can clearly see how far someone is into the run just looking at their star count. For example, with that Ocarina of Time 100%, you could just slap someone down in the middle of the game and I would have no idea how far you are into the speedrun, because everything's done like completely out of order, so I'd have no clue how far you are, like time wise. But with Mario 64 you could usually tell with the star count. I think having a game that is easy to watch and understand as a viewer makes it more fun as well, because it's less complicated to get into. Again, we're like talking about this. But yeah, that's my opinion on different games. I think as well, I don't think it's a bad thing that certain games are harder to get into. It's definitely a good thing if you want to get into those games, but I just think that it can stop certain people starting out, because with certain games you might need to practice loads of tricks before you even start doing runs, and that can make it less fun. But games that you can easily get into, like with no knowledge or no intentions of getting really good, I think are the best games. For example, Super Mario Odyssey. There's a lot of 2D Mario games that are fairly easy to get into. Just games that are easy. Games that are easy games in general are just easier to get into than obviously harder games. Because of harder games, the actual casual level of that game is a lot harder, so speedrunning it on top of that would just be like even harder. So yeah, there's so many different games. I might go back to this topic, but I feel like another thing that makes speedrunning good is the fact that it's so accessible. Now, all you need to speedrun is the game itself, the console, and that's what you really need. If you want to record your runs and post online or get into like Discord communities, then obviously you'll need a capture device, or you'll need OBS, or you'll need some sort of way of capturing what you're doing. However, if you just want to do speedruns for fun, like if you're just trying it out for like the first time to see if you enjoy it, all you need is the game and the controller, and maybe some kind of tutorial on YouTube, which are usually easy to find for most games. Like Super Mario 64, for example, huge game. There's going to be so many videos and tutorials. Like, I've even made tutorials myself for the game. So I think the fact that it's so accessible is really good, because people can just get into it and do it. Like, it's not as if they have to spend like loads and loads of money on it. Like, I guess at a higher level you might get like a better controller, or you might get a certain version of the game that's rarer because it might be a few frames faster. But that's only really at the super high end, and you don't need to even think about that getting into speedrunning. And yeah, it's just so accessible, and the community is really good as well. I'm going to touch on the community a bit later on. I might even make a separate podcast just going on about the community, because there's so much to say about it. But I think the fact that the game has got, not the game, but just speedrunning in general has got such an open community and such a helpful community, really, I think it's such a good thing, because you can easily just get into a game without having to like ask for hours and hours on how to do this and that. Like, there's already tutorials. People are willing to just help you out and give up their free time to show you what to do, or to give you advice, or to even congratulate you on like your first few attempts. Like, they'll look at like what you've done well, like what you can improve on. Like, speedrunners are always happy to answer people's questions as a new player. Like, I think that's how every community should be. Like, you get certain communities where higher level players kind of look down upon people starting out, and they give them like shame for being bad. But with the speedrunning community, it's almost like the opposite. Like, if you see a new player, you don't necessarily laugh at them. You look at them and you want to help them get to like where you're at. And I think that's just what makes the community what it is, especially with smaller games. For example, the Pikmin community. The Pikmin speedrunning community isn't nowhere near as big as the Mario 64 community, because Pikmin is nowhere near as big of a game, but so many people are willing to help. Like, I've actually got advice from the world record holder before. Like, it's just that good. Like, even world record holders are willing to help new players at the game. Like, that's the kind of commitment we're on about here. It's not just a case of like random people helping you. Well, with the 64 community, it will more be random people, because the world record holders, they're probably too busy doing like world record attempts, and they can't answer for everyone because there's so many people asking questions. But yeah, I think that's another thing. I think having friends in that community as well, like people you can do races with, does make speedrunning a lot more fun. Like, rather than just as like a solo effort on playing the game, you're actually racing someone else, and you're talking about the game, and you're bonding over these things, and you're helping each other get better at the game. I think it's just great, the fact that you're helping someone else get better and they're helping you get better, and you're just pushing each other to be the best you can be at a game. I think that's like one of the best things you can do. And it's just really good for socializing as well, because I'll just get onto this point later, because it's quite a deep point I want to talk about. I think another thing that makes speedrunning so fun is the fact that you're playing through a game, especially if it's a game that you know well. Like, for example, Mario 64 is like my childhood favorite game. I know it inside out. Well, obviously I do now, but even back then I knew where all the stars were, I knew how to get every star. And once you've played a game so many times, it kind of gets boring, because you know where everything is, you've done it so many times. The challenge of the game is kind of gone, because you've gotten to a point where you can easily get stuff without it being challenging. So you kind of don't play the game anymore, because you're kind of thinking like, what's the point, you know? Because it's like a single player game, like I've already completed it like a dozen times. Like, what's the point in playing it again? But speedrunning adds this extra layer to the game. Like, if you imagine like Mario 64 is like an iceberg, so the top 10%, like what you can see, that's from like a casual point of view, from like a let's play point of view when you first play the game. Like, that's the amount of enjoyment and discovery and, you know, fulfillment you get from playing the game. And then the other 90% of what you can't even see is like the speedrunning community, the glitch community, the tool assisted speedrun community. Like, there's all these extra layers, and there's all these extra things you can do with the game. There's this huge challenge. Like, speedrunning is like an endless challenge as well, because with games, obviously once you complete all the challenges you kind of feel like there's nothing to do, but with speedrunning you can just keep pushing yourself over and over for new goals. You can try out other categories, you can try out new tricks. There's so many things you can do that it's almost impossible to get bored of a game. Obviously if you do, you can just change games, like it's not really a big deal. Like, burnout's obviously a thing that will happen to everyone. That's like a separate podcast I could talk about, which I probably will do now. But yeah, I think the fact that also you're playing a game that you know well. So, for example, in Mario 64, I didn't even need to learn the controls or anything. I was already comfortable with long jumping, wall jumping, diving. Like, I didn't even need to learn any of that before speedrunning the game. I already knew all the levels inside out. So, at that point, it was just a case of just learning the route for the game and getting better and better from there. And I think another thing that just makes it fun is seeing how good you can actually get at a game. Because when you start out, you look at like the world record holders, or you look at mid-level players or top players, and you think to yourself, like, how are these people so good? Like, you think you'll never be that good, but if you just stick to it and you really enjoy it, you'll be absolutely shocked at how far you can actually get with a game. Like, you sometimes forget how good you actually are at a game when you're so used to the gameplay you're playing at. It's actually hard to appreciate how good you are at something when you're actually good at something. It's really weird, but you don't appreciate it the same way. Like, for example, if you were like a complete noob at the game and you suddenly just got really good, you'd have a higher appreciation for that. But if you've worked your way up to that point, it's really hard to tell how good you are, or like how much time you've actually put in and stuff, because it's just natural to you. And it's just second nature to be at the level you're at, and you're just focused on getting even better. And again, back on the point of it being familiar, you don't even need to learn the game. Like, for example, if you're picking up a game you've never played before as a speed game, like, that's going to take longer to master, because you're going to want to complete the game casually, you're going to want to mess around with the controls a lot more. Like, for example, if I was to pick up Banjo-Kazooie, I've never completed Banjo-Kazooie. I've played it here and there on like different platforms, on like demos and stuff. I've seen videos of it. It would be so difficult for me to get into speedrunning it, because I have no idea where anything is. I have no idea what to even do in the run. That I would have to figure all of that stuff out first, and then I'd have to learn all of the tricks, all of the movement. And it would just take forever. But if you pick a game that you are already familiar with, like, you kind of get a head start on other people, especially if it's a game you've watched a lot of. I think watching a game as well is also a very good thing to do. If you watch a game constantly, you will almost get better without doing anything. Now, that's not to say you have to put in a lot of work and practice and effort, but simply watching players that are slightly better than you will automatically just make you better at the game, in my opinion, because you will then find different ways to practice tricks, or you'll think, oh, maybe I should do this, maybe I should do that. And if you're putting in the practice at this as well, then you're going to get good. You're going to get a lot better, a lot quicker than you would if you were just doing attempts by yourself with nothing to compare to. And yeah, I think that's what makes speedrunning really good. It's like the game that you really loved to play as a child, or it's just a game that you love, and you get so much more out of it from speedrunning. Because people who aren't in the speedrunning community, some people think that speedrunners play games as fast as possible simply just so they can complete the game and move on. Like, it's as if they don't care about the game, they just want to rush through the game, move on to play a different game. But the funny thing is, speedrunners actually have way more of an appreciation for a game than most casual players would. Because they've probably put in like 100 times more time, like 10 times more time, 100 times more time, like so much stupid like that. Like, speedrunners put in ridiculous hours into games, especially world record holders. And because they put in so many hours and so much time, they have so much more appreciation for the game because they understand all the little parts of what makes the game good, like all the inner workings of the movement and the level design and the game design. And they probably have more of an appreciation just for the whole thing in general because they understand it on a different level to you because you've just played it casually and they've probably completed it hundreds of times in different ways with different tricks, you know. And I think the fact that you're playing through a game, it's like a clear goal, like, because obviously before, as a casual player, your goal is to just beat the game, you know, like that's the end goal. But the end goal now is beating the game faster than you beat it before. It's like a competition with yourself, which is quite interesting to me. Because usually with games, it's the player versus the game. But with speedrunning, it's the player against the player. You're literally against the best version of yourself. And the whole point of speedrunning is to become better than your best time. So it's just a competition with yourself. I know there's other people on the leaderboard, I know there's world records, and there's certain goal times you can try and achieve, but at the end of the day, your main comparison is your previous best run. And I think you really do need to remember that getting into speedrunning, because it's so easy to look at players who are really good, who've been playing for years, and you automatically compare what you're like after a few days to like what they're like after a few years. And it's really easy to be discouraged because you're thinking, I'll never get to that level, or there's no point putting in all that time if it takes that long to get there. But you gotta remember why you started speedrunning in the first place, and the reason you started was probably because you just wanted to play the game because it's a fun game that you're passionate about, and you just want to do a few runs of the game and then get into it. It's not a case of, I want to be the best at this game, which I know some people do that with certain games. But yeah, you really do need to stop comparing yourself to enjoy speedrunning. Like, I got so much more joy from speedrunning, like, more now, because I don't compare myself to other runners. I literally just play for fun here and there. I don't put huge amounts of pressure on myself to get certain times. And yeah, you just need to find what you enjoy. Like, some people get a lot of fulfillment from loads of practice and getting really good really fast. If that's what you like doing, just do that, but you just need to figure out what you like doing, and you don't want to compare to other people's standards of how much they practice or what time they've got, because it's all irrelevant at the end of the day. And I feel like it can just ruin speedrunning. If you just compare yourself constantly, it can ruin it for you. And you just gotta remember it is a single player thing. Like, even though there is other people, it is like a race against yourself. Now, I'm not saying it's all bad. I think it's always good to strive for like faster times or to try and beat a certain person. But just don't let that be your main motivation, because things can just get really toxic when your main motivation is someone else you want to beat or a certain time you really want to get, because it more becomes about that rather than the actual game and enjoyment itself. Obviously, if you're going for a world record, you'll probably be playing at times where you don't want to be playing, or you'll be putting in like ridiculous hours for the sake of wanting to be the best at something. Like, there is a place for that, but in my opinion, that's just not where I find joy within speedrunning anymore. I don't find a lot of joy in pushing myself hours and hours a day to practice and putting loads of pressure on myself, because I have like other things I'd rather do. But that doesn't stop me from speedrunning here and there and still improving here and there. So another topic I want to talk about is practice, because I kind of mentioned it just. is practice is actually really fun, in my opinion. Now, practice, when you first start out with practice, I argue it's more fun as a new player, because you're practicing things that are new. You're practicing all these tricks, and if they're easy tricks, you're most likely going to be getting them really easily, and you're most likely going to be able to learn stuff really quickly, and you feel like you're progressing really fast through a game. Like, for example, you learn like this trick, and then you learn that trick, and you know, you can just easily do them in runs. But when you get to like a higher level, once you get to like the mid-level, or even like the high end, well, it will be mainly the high end, tricks aren't as easy to learn, and tricks are nowhere near as rewarding to learn either. Like, for example, let me talk about bomb clip. Bomb clip is a really, I wouldn't say it's super easy, but it's a fairly easy trick that most beginners learn pretty much straight away, and it saves about 12 seconds, and you know, it's quite easy to learn, it's quite rewarding to learn. You know, it's probably only going to take like an hour of gameplay to get it down, and you know, you can easily just save 12 seconds every time. You know, it's pretty easy, it's pretty cool. However, at like a higher level, you're going to be looking at certain time saves that may take hours and hours to perfect, and they'll probably save a fraction of what that saves. Like, you are not going to run into 12-second time saves in the high-end level of Super Mario 64. There's no way you're going to be able to find these extremely like high-level time saves that save more than 10 seconds. It's extremely rare that that ever happens. Like, most things are going to save like a second, 2 seconds, maybe like 3 seconds if you're lucky, half a second. But the thing is as well, it's not just that, it's what you have to do to save that time. For example, it might be a complete reroute of a certain star. It might be a reroute of a 100 coin star just to save 2 seconds. It could be like a really difficult lag reduction that could be really inconsistent, that could maybe save half a second. It could be like a risky jump that could save a second, but if you miss it, you could lose a minute. Like, usually the higher you get with speedrunning, the more risk that plays into it. And when there's more risk, it obviously makes the reward harder to get consistently, because it's going to turn you away from doing certain things in runs, because it's going to be like, is that really worth doing for a second when you can lose a minute? Like, you really do have to think when you get into a game, like, what is worth doing, what's worth practicing, do I do this, do I do that? Like, you really just need to think about certain things before you do runs. And you shouldn't ever feel pressured to learn difficult tricks straight away in practice, because I feel like, again, that's playing into the comparison side, because it's like comparing yourself to people who are really good, and as a new player, it's going to be really difficult, almost impossible, to do tricks like Pillarless consistently or Lakitu Bounce. But as you get better at the game, learning these tricks will not feel like as big of a thing. So they will still feel like a big thing to learn, but that's just because they are big tricks. They are difficult tricks, so they are going to be difficult to do and learn. But once you're at a certain level, you'll have a lot more confidence as well, and confidence is actually a huge thing, in my opinion, in speedrunning. I feel like not only do you get better at a game, but you get more comfortable and confident with the game. And I feel like that's actually really important when it comes down to learning these harder tricks. Because if you're a new player with no confidence who barely knows how to move Mario, it's going to be almost impossible to do things like Pillarless. However, if you're like a mid-level player who's gotten half-decent times in most of the categories, you're going to feel really confident about learning these tricks. You're going to really want that time save, you know, that time save's going to mean quite a bit to you as well. So I feel like that would help you. Like, for example, I learned Pillarless when I had, I think, a 54 in 70 star. And yeah, it was around the right time to learn it for me. And if I had learned that any earlier, it just would have been pointless, because a lot of these hard tricks, you don't even need them at a lower level. They're more of just a distraction at a lower level, because there's so many other things you can improve on that will make you improve quicker. For example, movement. Just improving your overall movement can save multiple minutes over a run. But learning like a 20-second trick, that'll guarantee you that same amount of time save every time. It'll only be 20 seconds, it won't be more. It might even be less sometimes, depending on how well you do it. But with movement, it's something you can always improve on, and it's something that can save like an exponential amount of time. Like, it's not just limited to a certain amount of time it can save, because it's something you do all over the run. So I feel like you really need to look at what's beneficial and what plays into the run the most, and then focus on that. Now obviously you can practice how you want, I'm not telling you what you can and can't do, but that's just my advice. I do think you should focus on all the easiest stuff first, because all the harder stuff will be easier to learn once you get to it. I think the fact that there's so many tricks as well, and so much variety, and having to change routes and doing certain stars, I think that makes speedrunning fun as well, because it's always changing. Even though the route of what you're doing is the same and you're getting the same stars, like especially 120 star, you're getting the same 120 stars. It's different because as you get better, you approach each thing differently. So even though it looks like you're doing the same thing every time, you're not, because you're doing it differently. You're doing it more improved than you were doing it before, and I think that's like a really satisfying thing to look back at. You can look at like, oh, I did this and that, and now I do it like this. You know, you can really just see the progression. You can see the fact that you're actually getting through the game faster, and I think that's always good because you see the progression right in front of you. And I think that's another thing that makes speedrunning fun. It's instant. It's not instant gratification, that's a completely different thing, but you see the results in front of you. You clearly see what time you got, and you see the time get lower, and as the time gets lower, you know that you're getting better. I think that's just really good. Like, the progress is just always in front of you, and I think getting the result like right at the end of the run, like that's your final time, and you have like a time you can attach your name to, I think that's like a really special thing for speedrunning. You know, like you get a certain time and that's like considered to be a really good time in a certain category, you know. Like, you know, you're just doing well if you're improving, or if you're getting close to your like personal best. So yeah, that's the thing with practice. It's quite an interesting thing to think about. There's probably even more things I could talk about. But yeah, I'm going to talk a bit about the community now. Like I said, the community is a big thing, and I might even make a separate podcast on the community itself, because there's so much you could talk about. But when I say community, I don't just mean things like Discord servers and the people you talk to. I mean the content as well, because it's not just people who do speedruns. There's so many other people within the community who enjoy doing things, and they're passionate about different things. For example, certain people might not even like speedrunning the games themselves. They might just like finding out what routes are quicker. They might like comparing different routes or glitches or tricks. They might even like making beginner tutorials. Like, they might not have the ability to get world record, or they might not want to go for world record. So instead, they decide to make beginner tutorials because they're experienced enough to do that, which I think is very good. You might get certain people who are really passionate about getting certain single star times, but they're not passionate about running like full game categories, because it is a very different skill set being able to run a 20-second star versus like a 2-hour long speed run. Like, both are very different skill sets with very different types of people who enjoy those things, or who are good or bad at those things. And I think as well, you get certain people who do documentary style videos on speedrunning, which are really interesting to watch and listen to. Or you get people who talk about the latest news, or they talk about new world records, or they analyze world records, or people put together compilations of like speedrun fails, or rage in speedrunning, or lucky moments in speedrunning, or top 10 lists. Like, the list goes on. It's not just a case of people just do speedruns of games and that's it. There's like this whole community around speedrunning now. Like, it's 2022. Speedrunning's not what it was like 10 years ago. Speedrunning's, I wouldn't say it's mainstream yet, but it's a lot more mainstream than it used to be. And in a way, I do think that's really good, because it's a lot more accessible, a lot more people know about it. And there's so many more things you can do within that community. It's not just a case of people did runs. Like, there's so many tutorial videos and comparison videos, and it makes the community feel like more of a community rather than just a load of people independently doing runs. It's like this actual community of people who do all these different things, but they all contribute towards one thing. They contribute towards like people getting into speedrunning and people getting enjoyment from it. Like, you might just get a lot of enjoyment from watching people do speedruns, and that's okay. For example, Super Mario Odyssey, I have ran that game before, but I have no intention to speedrun it at the moment. However, I do sometimes enjoy watching runs of the game. Even though I don't like playing the game, watching runs of the game is really fun. And I like watching the new world records sometimes, or just like watching top players. Like I remember I used to watch a lot of Nitrovida when he was going for the 59. And I remember when he got 59, it was great in that game. Like sometimes you can just get enjoyment from watching other people. Or for example, ZFG, who runs Ocarina of Time 100%. I have no intentions on running Ocarina of Time 100%, but I love Ocarina of Time as a game, and I love seeing how good ZFG is at that game, because I think he's insane at what he does. You know, it's entertaining to watch, so I enjoy watching his stream highlights sometimes. I used to watch them quite a lot, actually. And like another thing as well within the community is people who you just enjoy watching purely because you like them as a content creator or as a YouTuber or a streamer. Well, a content creator covers both of those things. But for example, Small Ant 1, I don't particularly enjoy what he actually does, but I used to love watching him just because I found him entertaining and very different to a lot of other Odyssey YouTubers, because he did all these different challenge runs. He had really good commentary. He'd attempt really insane things like beating the game blindfolded, beating the game without collecting coins. It was all these crazy challenges he did, and it's just really entertaining to watch because of how different it was. And the fact he had really good commentary. For example, if they were just plain runs, I would get really bored. I wouldn't just watch a plain run of Mario Odyssey with no commentary. I'd have to watch it with someone talking over or something entertaining going on, because, you know, it just wouldn't hold my interest. And I feel like streamers who are able to commentate over things really well and explain what's going on and are able to be entertaining, I think that really makes it good to watch. For example, Kita, he's a really good example of a YouTuber who does really interesting challenge runs for Ocarina of Time and Majora's Mask. I'd highly recommend checking them out. I've not finished watching all of them yet, but from the ones I've watched, they are extremely interesting, and even if you know a lot about those games, you can still find new glitches and new concepts that you probably never even thought about. And it's just really interesting because his commentary is really good. For example, Ocarina of Time 3 Pause was one of the first ones I ever watched, and it's where it's like a tool-assisted speedrun, 100% Ocarina of Time, and they only pause the game 3 times to change what items they've selected. And that may sound impossible, but when you watch the run and they break down all the glitches and they break down all the tricks and the route and why the game has to be routed a certain way or why certain equips are happening, it's just so interesting to watch. It's hard to explain, but you do have to be quite passionate about those things, but you might find it really interesting. It's just one of those things. Like, there's so much different types of content is what I'm trying to say. There's all these different challenge runs that people commentate over that you can get a lot of joy from. It's not just a case of watching people do regular runs, it's watching people explain the inner workings and why you do certain things within challenge runs that can be interesting to watch as well. So yeah, I've covered quite a bit about the community. There's a last bit I want to go over at the end of the video about the community. There's a few more topics I want to talk about just before that though. One of the main topics I want to talk about, which I kind of covered in my nerves in speedrunning video, or how to control your nerves in speedrunning, is speedrunning is insanely thrilling. And what I mean by that is getting a PB, getting a personal best, is insanely satisfying. And, you know, as a new player, that feeling of getting a personal best becomes really addictive, and it also becomes like your main driving force on becoming better at the game. Like, you get a personal best, and that's your incentive to get another personal best because it feels so good. So you practice, you get another personal best, and before you know it, you're like moving up, you're getting really good at a game. But that feeling of getting a personal best never goes away. If anything, the feeling of getting a personal best actually becomes even better when you get to a higher level, because it doesn't happen as often. As a new runner, you get used to it almost, because you're getting personal bests all the time. So then when you stop getting personal bests, it feels out of the ordinary when you're having to do more resets than actually getting personal bests. It feels like you're not playing very well. But in reality, that's just how speedrunning works. Speedrunning is not easy. Speedrunning is extremely difficult, and the further you get, the harder it gets. Speedrunning does not get easier as you get better. Speedrunning is the complete opposite. And you really do, if you want to get good at a game, like if you want to get really good at a game, it takes a lot of time, it takes a lot of effort, it takes a lot of discipline, it will take a lot of pushing yourself. And I think the main thing is just patience and not falling into negative mindsets. Like I talked a lot about mindsets in the other video, but your outlook on your gameplay hugely affects your overall gameplay. Like if you're always looking at your gameplay as a negative, or you're comparing yourself, like I said before with the comparison topic, or you're looking at what you're doing bad rather than good, or like the amount of time it will take to get to a certain point, then that's gonna turn you away. But what you need to focus on is just improving yourself, just improving your best, and doing what you need to do. Like rather than just procrastinating learning certain tricks or practicing something then blaming that when it goes wrong, just knuckle down and do it. That's a big thing with speedrunning, is discipline. Like I've learned a lot of patience and discipline through speedrunning, actually, which is quite funny. And it's taught me that if you want something, it's not easy. You have to do it. You just have to put in a lot of time and effort to get something. Like these things will not just come to you really easily, and you won't just be able to get certain times just because you want to get a certain time. You have to put in a lot of work and commitment to that time. And because you put in all that work, when you actually get that time, something else I learned is it feels 1,000 times better than if someone was to just hand you that time. Because you've earned that. All the blood, sweat and tears from practice, all the free time you used up to actually practice the game, like all the commitment you put into the game, all the times you didn't give up practicing even when you thought you couldn't do it, have all paid off. And all the failed attempts have paid off as well, because you finally got a personal best. And that feeling of getting a personal best is amazing. And something else that I think is just as amazing is when you're on a really good run. Now when you're on a really good run, you feel completely in the moment, in my opinion. Well, that's how I feel when I'm doing a really good like speed run, especially with the longer categories like 120 star or 70 star. Like the start of the run is boring to me because you're just resetting the timer all the time. That you're trying to be a perfectionist, because when you get better you become more of a perfectionist at a game because you understand your abilities. So when something small goes wrong, you naturally get really annoyed by it and you reset over it sometimes. So once you actually do get to the mid game or the end game of what you're doing, things become very exciting for two reasons. One, because you have a chance to PB, and two, because you never normally get to this point. And when you get to that point in an actual run, it's a very different feeling to doing that in practice. For example, something I think I mentioned in the Nerbs and Speedrunning video is the fact that the upstairs section of the run I enjoy more. But I don't think I enjoy the upstairs section more because I like the levels more, or I like the gameplay more. I think I purely enjoy it more because of the feeling you are on when you're actually playing through that section of the run, because you're closer to the end of the run, there's a lot of hope to PB. You know, you have all these Nerbs, and again, like I was saying about Nerbs, you can see it as a good thing and a bad thing. I covered this heavily on the other documentary, so I'm not going to go too far into it. But if you see it as like fear, you kind of just make loads of mistakes, you play really sloppily, you get really nervous. Or you can just see it as like motivation and adrenaline. And if you see it in this way, you can use it to like push yourself, and you can just completely focus on one thing, and you can just play like an absolute god. And you can enter just a flow state of just playing like an actual god. And you're pulling off all these really hard tricks that you're practicing. And it's not just a case of the thrill of going so fast and doing everything so well that I love. It's a case of knowing that everything I've practiced has actually paid off. I think that's like a big thing, because you practice all these tricks, and when things are going wrong you really do doubt yourself. Like you really doubt what you're doing because things should be going well for you. But when things are actually going well, it is the best feeling in the world, because you know what you're doing is actually paying off. Like, you know all the practice you're putting in is actually working. It's not just a case of it's not working. So you're getting results, and I think that's like a big thing, getting results that you can clearly see in front of you, and things are going well when you need them to be going well. And it's a case of actually the practice you're doing becoming useful, because you're practicing these late game tricks for like this moment of when you're on personal best pace, and it's within these moments that it actually matters. Like, you can't fail this trick. Like, when you're near the start of a run, it doesn't matter too much if you die, because you only lose like 5 minutes of progress. You know, you can easily just do that again, no pressure. But if you're like an hour and 30 minutes into a run and you're in TikTok clock, you better get that trick correctly. You better not fall off and die and lose a minute, because getting back to that point, it's going to take a lot of time and effort. And I think that's also like part of the thrill, like I was on about. You're only nervous because you know the stakes are high. You know that failing will result in a lot of wasted free time, or it will result in you feeling really bad about yourself. So you do everything you can to avoid that. And I think that's just what makes it what it is when you're playing on good pace compared to playing in practice. Like, there's all this other pressure that plays into how you play and how you experience the game. And it really changes how you play the game. Because I've seen like non-speedrunners saying like, oh, wouldn't it be easier, wouldn't it be better if people could just pause runs and come back to the run when they've calmed down? Or can't people just have breaks so they don't get so stressed out? But in my opinion, that would ruin speedrunning. If you could just take breaks whenever you wanted, imagine that. Imagine you're just watching the world record and the runner, he just takes like a 30-minute break before the final Bowser fight. Like, no. I think sometimes you really do need pressure. You really do need to be under that pressure. You really do need that adrenaline sometimes to actually push yourself to your limits. Like, I feel like sometimes you play like in autopilot mode and you're not really playing to your potential, but when you're nervous, when you have stakes to actually get a personal best, you really do play at your best. And I think that's always a good thing to see. Like, playing at your absolute best is always a good thing. It's not a case of, I want to get world record. It's a case of, can I play at my very best today? And when you're on good pace, you're doing just that. You're doing everything you can. And that's another reason why it feels good. It's not just the adrenaline rush you get or the thrill of actually getting a personal best, but it's knowing that you're playing the best you can and there's no more you can do to actually be better than you're being. Which I think that's a big thing, and that's what makes speedrunning fun. And it's just the fact that these things don't happen very often. You don't very often get a personal best later on, or you don't very often get really good runs. So when they do happen, it makes it more special. So yeah, that's something I've talked about now. And again, with PBing, like, I feel like PBing is just a huge motivation. And I think if it wasn't for having personal bests in speedrunning, it just wouldn't be the same. If like people didn't have certain times like based on their skill, you can clearly see how good someone is at a game based on what time they've got. Like, I know that's not always an accurate way of measuring someone's skill at a game, just their time, but you can see around the level they're at by what time they've got. And you know, like, that can become addictive as well, you know, trying to get your time down lower and lower, or having certain times you want to achieve. I think that can be good in a way, like I said, because it keeps you improving at the game and it keeps you motivated, and that's fun. And obviously it feels really good when you get a personal best. But again, like, it can get to a point where that's your main motivation, where all you care about are the numbers rather than the actual gameplay and strats, and that's when it just becomes toxic. And you really just need to be self-aware the whole time that you are free to enjoy that. Like, you really do want to enjoy that side of it, because that's part of why you do it, because the reward of getting a personal best feels really good. That's like the reward you get. But again, like, that can't be your main motivation if you want to just get good at a game, because you'll burn out really easily. There's like one more thing I want to talk about now before I go back to the community topic. But watching top player speedruns, this kind of relates to like the thrill side of speedrunning, can be interesting to watch. It's really nerve-wracking to watch a top player on world record pace or on good pace. It's almost like watching your favourite football team winning like the World Cup, or like, if you're into sports, I know a lot of people are into sports, they can probably relate, like when they watch their favourite team win, or when they're watching penalties in a football game. You know, it's the same kind of feeling watching a top level speedrunner on world record pace. You know, you don't want them to fail, you just want them to hit all the tricks, and there's so much anticipation around each trick when they get to it. Like, are they going to do it? Are they going to fail? you know, and the whole time you're just supporting that person in the chat as well, and everyone else is giving them motivation to play better, which will give them even more pressure. But you know, it's part of the fun. Just watching world record runs, even pre-recorded runs, can just be fun to watch. Just not knowing where the time loss will be, and just seeing how the world record holders react to certain things, or how they react to a record even. Like, you can feel really happy for someone when they get a world record. For example, Simply has got world record in 120 star in 2020. He's not got world record anymore. Like, he might do, like, at some point in the future, so this podcast could be inaccurate. But in 2020, he got the 120 star world record for the first time. Now, Simply has been playing the game for like 8 years, and he's been playing it since he was like younger than me now. And he's always been within like the top 10 in 120 star. He's always been a top player in 120 star. But he's never got world record, but he's always been like near the top. So watching him actually get world record was so satisfying, and his reaction was just priceless. Like, I'd encourage anyone to watch the video. It's Simply's 138.28, and his reaction is probably one of the best reactions I've ever seen in speedrunning. Like, it's not an insane pop off of someone screaming and swearing at the camera. It's more just him actually getting world record, and you know, and he breaks down and cries, and it's really emotional to watch, and you can see how much it means to him. And you know, it was a really special moment when Simply got world record. That I really remember when that happened, like the day it happened. And I remember like watching it, like that reaction. I've watched it so many times, and I remember just being so inspired by how passionate he was about the game and how much it meant to him. And you could really see how much the world record meant to that top player. Like, you can really see how much the game means to top players at certain games. I think that's always really good to see, the passion. It's not just a case of, oh, I want to get world record and then I want to just move on to do something else. It's a case of he really loves this game, and he's putting everything he's got into this game, and it's finally all paid off. And that's like the payoff, his reaction. Like, he's finally actually achieved world record, you know. You just have to see it. But what I'm trying to say is you can get a lot of enjoyment through seeing people succeed in speedrunning. It's not just a case of you achieving stuff. Like, watching other people reach their goal time is always good to see. I always enjoy seeing people get personal bests, especially when they hit big like barriers, like the 149 barrier in 120 star. It's always fun to watch people like react to getting a 149, you know, because it's obviously this really big time, and people get insanely excited at the fact that they got this time, and it's always good to watch. But yeah, the final point I wanted to talk about was community, and I might do a follow-up podcast for this because it is a really deep topic, but I think finding your place in the community will bring you a lot of joy. And what I mean by that is you really need to figure out what you enjoy about speedrunning and double down on that. For example, I don't particularly enjoy grinding a game for hours on end to get to a certain point. I more enjoy just being here and there, making videos on what I want, like making compilations. Like, I'm doing this podcast series at the moment because I find it really interesting talking about these topics. Like, I get a lot of joy from this kind of thing. I get more joy from doing a podcast than actually doing runs now. So I think what I'm trying to say is look at all the different aspects of speedrunning and experiment with all the different things, and figure out what you enjoy doing the most, and just double down on that. And don't feel pressured to do certain things in the community if you don't want to do them. Like, don't feel pressured into running certain categories if you don't want to do them. At the end of the day, speedrunning is about improving yourself and finding enjoyment through replaying old games or replaying childhood games. And you know, it's not about that side of it. It's not about impressing people. So I really do think you need to find your place in the community, because it will really help you and build your confidence within that. And once you find your place, you know, you'll feel like you belong, and you're able to help people, and you're able to do what you do best. And I think that's what the community needs more of. The community needs people who just do what they do best. Like, people are free to do what they want, obviously, but it's only really in the last few years that we started to get like podcasts and documentary style videos and video essays on speedrunning and like videos on the mental game of speedrunning. Like before then, it was mostly just runs. It was just plain runs of people beating the game like faster and faster. But now we've got so many other types of content, or people doing races or challenge runs or runs with like consequences. Like there's so many things you can find now. It's honestly unreal, and it's just amazing to see the community get to this point. And I'm so proud of the speedrunning community. It's probably like the best community I know. And I'm so proud to be part of the speedrunning community. Like anyone can be part of the speedrunning community. You just have to get into speedrunning and do runs and, you know, talk to people. It's a really easy community to get into. It's a very accepting community as well. They don't like block people from the community if they don't like where they're from, or if they don't agree with their like nationality or race or sex. Like there's nothing like that in the speedrunning community. It's a very open community. So yeah, that's it really. I've mainly talked about what makes speedrunning fun. I've talked about lots of different aspects, and yeah, I hope you found this interesting to listen to. I hope you learned something from it. And if you're not into speedrunning, I hope this inspires you to try out speedrunning at some point. But again, no pressure, because you can do what you want. So yeah, if you enjoyed this podcast, please like the video and subscribe if you're new around here. I really enjoyed making this podcast, and I'll probably make another one soon. So yeah, I'll see you next time.